starting out life on the PlayStation 2, the Yakuza series has consistently innovated and managed to stay relevant right up until this day. There's been many sequels and spin-offs that help solidify the franchise's success, but one lesser-known entry that deserves way more attention than it got is Yakuza Dead Souls. It's a huge departure from the usual formula you'd expect, and instead takes on the form of a sort of arcade shooter. It's not only the gameplay that's different, however, the story is also a change from what the games are known for and revolves around 4 separate chapters that each star a specific character fans will know and love. Each chapter sees you fighting through wave after wave of enemies as you hope to eventually reach the city limits and ultimately your safety. As you would expect, you're given a wide range of weaponry in order to achieve this goal. May it be a standard pistol or dual-wielded shotguns, there's a ton of ways to approach each swarm of zombies, and you'll need to utilize all of the options at your disposal as the hordes are relentless and pose a meaningful threat as you make your way through the adventure. To spice things up even further, there's also the inclusion of special abilities that see you teaming up with a partner to score some serious damage. There's quite a few of them for each character, such as throwing several grenades at the enemy and shooting them just as they land. Each of them are a real spectacle and manage to add a distinct amount of style to the combat that helps it flow even better. To top all of this off, you've also got the inclusion of several minigames that Yakuza is well known for, such as karaoke or darts, that help mix up the gameplay even further by providing a few engaging ways to pass the time. If you're a fan of the series, this one is a no-brainer, and likewise for those who enjoy arcade shooters, there is plenty to love. 3D Game Heroes is a unique action-adventure that takes a huge inspiration from the likes of Zelda, specifically the first game on the NES, where there was a real focus on open environments that moved from screen to screen. Even the story shares some similarities, as it's set up that long ago the sages used their power to seal away a great evil. Now in the present, evil has returned. It's up to you to obtain that power and vanquish it. The basic structure of the gameplay sees you exploring the world map, solving dungeons to recover orbs of power and gain equipable items along the way that let you access new areas and perform new moves. Magic plays a somewhat bigger role and is more involving than most Zelda games. As opposed to depleting it by lighting a lantern or charging a spin attack, you consume it by activating spells that you learn throughout the game. There are several of them, and unlike in some games, most of them are absolutely required to progress, and the ones that aren't are incredibly useful when used strategically. You might do damage to enemies, freeze an area, or slow down time, which all come in handy against the surprisingly challenging fights and bosses. Now visually, as the title of the game itself implies, the game's graphics are all composed of 3D dots, the idea being to take the pixelated look of classic NES games and updating it into a sort of 3D version. You'll find that there is also a lot of charm to be found, not to mention a character editor, and we're not talking about selecting from a set of designs and tweaking them. You get to create your entire character out of little blocks in 3D from the ground up, including colors, different poses, you name it. All in all, 3D Game Heroes flawlessly takes an old game's design and renews it. This one is well worth picking up if you can find it on the cheap. For long-time fans of the channel, you'll likely already be aware of my unhealthy obsession with Ridge Racer. While it's nowhere near the best racing game series you'll find on the PS3, it's definitely one of the most enjoyable due to its easy pick-up-and-play arcade nature. As with most racing games, the main meat and potatoes of the game lies in the championship mode, and here you're met with a series of tracks to race around and complete, whilst earning new cars and parts along the way. This is one of the finest aspects of the game, as it provides a deep system for car fans to fine-tune their car and take advantage of the several benefits they offer. It's not only faster speeds, but you can also earn aids that can help out, such as bumping into cars, resulting in taking less of a hit. The true star of the show, however, is the gameplay itself. Its arcade approach opens it up to players of all ages and skill levels, but at the same time offers up a drifting system that's essential to master in order to complete some of the more challenging races the game throws at you. Drifting through a tight corner as the music blasts and the announcer eggs you on is a feeling that just never gets old once you've got it down. Adding to the racing is the nitro system, which intricately ties into the upgrade options you'll unlock along the way. There's several types available, with the most common being a gauge that is made up of 3 sections. As you drift around each course, the gauge slowly rises and allows you to unleash either one part or your whole gauge as you please. There's several variations on this that give it different different effects such as being able to build the gauge quickly or offering faster speeds for fewer sections of the bar. Overall, Ridge Racer 7 is by no means the best racing game you'll find on the PlayStation 3, but with its stellar gameplay, impressive visuals and buttery smooth performance, is one that deserves a look, especially for fans of the series and of the genre as a whole. PlayStation 3 had a huge selection of solid RPGs to play, but one that never truly received the attention it deserved has to be Folklore. This game's story is one of mystery. The main characters, Ellen and Keats, are both brought to the strange town of Doolin for different reasons. By and large, the gameplay is split into two different types, with Folklore's 7 chapters with each of the protagonists. In the beginning of a chapter, you will sniff out clues and seek answers throughout Doolin village, and when night comes, you'll be transported to a realm of the surreal Neverworld where you must fight your way through to defeat the level's boss. In these realms, your character will encounter folks. You must battle them and discover their weak points, and there's about 100 of these beasts, each of them all requiring a different approach. Once you've defeated a folk, you can absorb its soul, and doing so grants you their power to wield against other folks. I love Folklore's story, but I think my favourite part of the game is using the folks in battle. There are so many of them, and they are each so different. You get to choose which ones you want to use by assigning them to the face buttons, and with a simple tap, bring them into the field. Different folks have specific elements they exhibit, be it thunder, wind or fire for example, and certain creatures are susceptible to certain elements and immune to others. This adds a ton of strategy to even the most mundane of encounters, which helps the combat excel. Overall, Folklore is a game with an intriguing and mysterious story, along with solid and fluent gameplay. The graphics are extremely artistic and easy on the eyes, and it has enough extra content to keep you playing for quite some time to come. Tales of Exilia introduces players to the lush floating world of Reyes Maxia, a world made up of 2 states who find themselves on the brink of war. The populace of the world is full of people that rely on the power of spirits to use everyday goods, whether it be for light or activating machinery, so naturally they play a major role in the story, which sees you taking up the role of one of 2 characters, either Jude or Miller. Both tell what is essentially the same story, but with a few deviations that promote an extra playthrough once you're done. When it comes to gameplay, those familiar with the series will know the Tales of franchise prides itself on its action-based combat gameplay. Like many other RPGs, battles begin when the player character touches an enemy roaming around on the map, and shifts to a circle arena, pitting a party of up to 4 characters against their opponents. Combat consists of stringing together combos using the X button for quick TP generating attacks and the circle button for flashy special attacks known as arts that consume TP. This system works perfectly and incentivizes the player to keep up the pressure during combat, which results in some truly exhilarating battles. Exilia was the first Tales game to actually be made for the PlayStation 3, and unfortunately it shows. It just doesn't astound technically. The main culprit are the textures that are just woefully undetailed and just flat out plain at times, but on the other hand, the artistic vision of the game more than makes up for this shortcoming. Using an oil painting style, the game's world almost seems like a painting on the wall that is expertly crafted. Each locale feels unique whether you visit one of the many cities or the snowy recesses of the highest peak, and thankfully the performance remains solid at 60 frames per second during fights, and in all honesty this is where the game truly comes into its own. While it has a few issues, Tales of Exilia is one of the better Tales games out there, a great RPG in general. If you like JRPGs and have a PlayStation 3, I strongly recommend giving this game a try. After the huge success of the first game, a sequel to Infamous was a foregone conclusion and released 2 years later. It once again saw players jumping into the shoes of Cole McGrath as he loses a long-anticipated battle with his greatest enemy, the Beast, and subsequently escapes to the newly introduced locale of New Moray in a last-ditch attempt to boost his powers. What's more is that the story takes some surprising twists and turns the further you progress, and depending on the choices you make, will lead to completely different endings. Now, being an open-world game, only playing the story missions will allow you to progress toward the conclusion, but there are thousands of side missions to do and things to collect. Doing all of these things is very fun thanks to the various and visually stimulating superpowers at Cole's disposal. Cole's amplified body allows him to shoot bolts of electricity out of his hands at enemies, toss electric grenades for wide-range damage, blow people away with his stunning blast that will also reflect rockets, and much more. Aside from combat elements, the biggest part of Infamous 2 is exploration. New Moray is big, but Cole has ways to get around quickly. You can slide on telephone wires to quickly move from one one place to the next, or grab one of the charged vertical poles and Cole will launch himself high into the air. It feels incredibly smooth just bolting around the city, which helps the game flow quite nicely. Finally, the biggest aspect of the game is the karma system. In almost every situation you have a choice. Do you assume the role of hero to a desperate city, or do you live up to your name as a demon? Cole unlocks his best powers by becoming either a hero or an infamous villain. Its saving grace though is that the story plays out quite differently, and the game gives you plenty of incentives to complete it twice, such as trophies and hard difficulty. Infamous 2 proves itself as an excellent sequel to an already unique game. Fun combat, engaging story, cool art style, beautiful soundtrack and tons to do make this a worthwhile ride everyone should take. Puppeteer is a spectacular platforming experience for the PlayStation 3 that unfortunately got overlooked by many. It's a shame too, because it is truly one of the most inventive, enjoyable and totally original side-scrollers of all time. Developed by Japan Studio, it's a sort of throwback to the platformers of old, such as Clockwork Knight and Klonoa, and the bizarre story really sets the stage, quite literally, for an unforgettable and dramatic adventure. It all kicks off with the main villain known as the Bear King, who kidnaps a boy named Kataru, ultimately turning him into a wooden puppet and taking his head. Kataru's quest to find his head and escape the grasp of the Bear King takes place on a stage of a puppet show, complete with mechanical sets, curtains and a virtual audience. As with most platformers, the game is split up into a series of levels that slowly ramp up the difficulty the further you progress. But Kataru's got a few tricks up his sleeve to help even the odds. The main one being a pair of scissors that you can use to attack enemies and essentially float through the air while cutting items or enemies made of fabric or paper. The cutting mechanic takes some getting used to and is honestly unlike anything I can remember playing in a platformer. The inventive stages and set pieces in combination with these scissors make for some incredibly interesting and memorable puzzles and boss fights that cement Puppeteer as one of the best platformers on the PlayStation 3. As unique as the gameplay is, the creative visuals presented in Puppeteer are just as mind-blowing at times. There's a clear amount of love that went into designing each and every aspect of the game, from the characters to each individual stage you'll come across. It's got a unique look that can call its own. If you fancy jumping into a platformer like no other, then look no further than Puppeteer. The bulk of Heavenly Sword's gameplay sees you taking up the fight as Nariko as she wields the Heavenly Sword. There are 3 different stances with which Nariko can wield the Heavenly Sword. There is a ranged stance where the sword is whipped around with chains to strike groups of foes and clear the area. There's also a speed stance which allows Nariko to double wield the sword and make quick combos. And lastly, there is a power stance where we see the Heavenly Sword as it appears in full, with Nariko striking enemies with great force. Switching in and out of each stance on the fly whilst linking them with combos is essential to overcoming some of the more difficult enemies the game throws your way, and luckily you can also counter-attack, which requires precise timing, rewards you with an awesome mini cinematic and an enemy being completely owned by Nariko. Now the learning curve is much steeper than God of War or Dynasty Warriors for example, but you get an enormous feeling of satisfaction when you are able to best the enormous amount of enemy soldiers. It's one of the PlayStation 3's first exclusives. I am blown away even now at how gorgeous this game looks and plays. The character detail in Heavenly Sword is amazing, and a lot of the game's recognition comes from Nariko's awesome red hair that fluidly ebbs and flows with every movement you make. The environments are just as impressive as well. You'll see gargantuan fortresses, lush mountainsides, and literally hundreds of characters appearing on screen for Nariko to sweep through. In some levels there is so much detail that the performance does dip a bit, but it's never enough to mess up the gameplay. All of the locales are grand, and the dynamic camera does a great job of showing off the game's massive scale. If you never got round to it back in the day, or are just simply fond of hack and slashes, there's plenty here to get stuck into. Back in 2004, Sony released Siren for the PlayStation 2, a very creepy survival horror game. Due to its poor sales numbers though, we never saw the sequel here in the West, and instead we'd have to wait for a remake of the first game to hit the PlayStation 3 for another chance to play the game. The story sees an American TV crew traveling to Japan to search for Hanuda, a mysterious village said to have disappeared after a landslide back in the 70s. While searching for the village, the crew stumbles across a human sacrifice ritual, and after one woman is murdered by its strange participants, an otherworldly siren sounds off and causes blood red rain to fall on the newly reappeared Hanuda village. Now trapped, the American TV crew and a couple of Hanuda's remaining residents must survive the horrors and find out the truth behind the Siren's call. Now Blood Curse is separated into 12 episodes, each with 4 to 6 chapters. Each chapter has you completing a variety of objectives with a certain character that can range from getting to a certain point in the area, protecting or leading a secondary character through dangers, or finding certain items. There are 2 ways to deal with deadly enemies populating the village: through stealthy infiltrations or through violence. Combat in Blood Curse is much better than the slow and mundane system of the original. With your weapon in hand, you now easily hold L1 to ready it and use square or R1 to attack. Visually, Hanuda Village is excellently designed to look like the haunted, desolate hellhole it has become. Everything from wide open fields, streets flooded with red water, and a deserted hospital give the game a very disturbing and tense atmosphere that easily rivals the likes of Silent Hill and Fatal Frame. All in all, Siren Blood Curse is quite possibly one of the best horror games on the PlayStation 3. If you're up for a real scare, then don't skip this one. Metal Gear Solid 4 is without a doubt one of the most notorious games for being stuck on the PlayStation 3. It marks the end of Solid Snake's journey in his fight against the Patriots, which sees you traveling the globe from the Middle East to South America, and even some nostalgic locations for longtime fans thrown in. MGS4 built off all of the systems that had come before it in the previous games. It still managed to innovate as it always had. It was mainly achieved through the use of the Octo Camo Suit. This new ability streamlined everything that was introduced in Snake Eater and allowed you to take on the texture of any object you're in contact with automatically. This stripped the somewhat cumbersome menu system and allowed you to stay in the action, which was significantly wrapped up as well. Instead of solely infiltrating an area, MGS4 introduced a battlefield system that saw 2 factions engaged in battle. As the player, you had the choice of affecting its outcome by supporting the local forces, and choosing to do so would result in some pretty engaging situations that you wouldn't else find yourself in. It's in these moments that the gameplay shines, so with the generous amount of weapons to use, you'll always find yourself customizing your current setup to suit your approach. May that be the stealthy and non-lethal path, or deciding to act like Rambo, the gameplay facilitates both. Now, there was no way I wasn't going to mention one of the most impressive aspects of the game, and that are the visuals. At the time, they were nothing short of breathtaking, and managed to still hold up incredibly well to this day, and stands as a real testament to the power of the PlayStation 3 when it was in the right hands. Metal Gear Solid 4 is one hell of a journey, and more importantly, one that is worth taking. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2, as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, and share the show with your friends. You can follow me on all of the socials, which are linked below, to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos, you'll find all of these links down below.